Hi guys. The winner of the Facebook chat was underrated comic books and jellyfish regeneration. So I will be doing this video about underrated comic books and jellyfish regeneration. Um, the conceit being that all of this is from the top of my head. I can certainly, all off the top of my head, discuss underrated comic books as well as definitely jellyfish regeneration to equally. Both of them I can do equally well. So, as far as underrated comic books, I'm going to start by saying that basically all American comic books are underrated. They get a lot of crap for being superhero based, and that's true, but that's mainstream comics in general. And superhero comic books in general are also underrated. Basically, the entire genre of the comic book in American society in general is underrated as far as its quality and its importance. There are very, very bad superhero comics, but there are also very, very good superhero comics. Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, for example, takes Hawkeye, a classic character, and makes it super interesting. But like, if you want to go really, really classic with the superheroes, anyway, like not really, really classic, but like kind of old, then there was a run called Exiles, which was second string X-Men characters, alternate versions of second string X-Men characters being put through a ringer like almost battle royale style. It was really good, and there were real stakes because any one of the characters could die at any time because it was outside of canon. It had good streaks and bad streaks, but for the most part, it was really interesting and really intriguing. There is basically so many comics that are good that have never pierced the public consciousness that I could literally go on for about an hour just listing the comic books that I've read, that I've enjoyed, that I've never heard another human being talk about. Like that Exiles one, for example, never heard anybody ever talk about that, and I always really enjoyed it. Let's see. And basically anything that's not a superhero comic book, there's some bad indie comics out there, but for the most part, just anything Image is putting out these days is basically indie, I would say. But then there's just a ton of graphic novels that get published every year that are just people's heart and soul poured into a graphic novel, and they're just fantastic. They do amazing things with art and storytelling, and nobody ever reads them, and they're just spectacular. So, just go read any comic books. Go Google graphic novels, top 10 graphic novels, follow those artists, listen to the things they say about where they got their interest, where they get their inspiration. If I could make one top recommendation for all the underrated comics out there that isn't just general, like just go read more comics, because there's a no bottom to the amount of content that you could find if you even enjoy reading comics a little bit. There's literally no bottom of things that you've never seen. But if I could do one that I would recommend everybody read, it would be Alan Moore's run on Promethea, which is the most literary and edifying comic book I think I've ever read in my life. And you should get a hard copy of it because he plays with the physical form of the comic book itself. Basically, Alan Moore is one of the most famous comic book writers of all time, and he's still criminally underrated. Like, as far as the impact on storytelling and pop culture, Alan Moore is a grumpy, bearded Santa Claus Swamp Thing guy, but he also has made probably the greatest collection of comics, the greatest the greatest oeuvre that there is. My personal favorite's Promethea, but also, like, God, his run on Supreme is also really, really good. He takes Superman in a way. He takes Superman. He takes Supreme, which is an Image Comics holdover from the 90s, like big pecs, like Rob Liefeld era with just like giant chests, like making fun of superhero comics. And he just takes that character and throws it all out the window, and he tells all the stories about Superman that DC Comics never would have let him tell. And he basically rebuilds Superman from the ground up and makes it just the best. So Promethea, number one, I can't even describe it because it's impossible to describe Promethea. But then right after that, Supreme. I could go on about comics all day. Thanks for that suggestion, Wim. You knew exactly what would be what would trigger me into discussing something passionately. Now, for jellyfish regeneration, another topic that I have an equally in-depth amount of knowledge about, equal to my knowledge of comic books, would be how jellyfish regenerate. So, coming off of the comic book thing, I'm definitely going to just come up with this metaphor, and it's definitely not like I am a writer for a major magazine website and I'm trying to do clickbait and I'm trying to relate to my reader in the most inane and insulting way possible. So I'm going to talk about this issue of jellyfish regeneration, and this metaphor just comes right off the top of my head, and it's definitely not the first thing I Googled, and it's not an article that I'm just reading off the screen. This is entirely my metaphor for jellyfish regeneration, and it's called... My brain, my memory is called, like Deadpool, this jellyfish has amazing superpowers. The moon jellyfish, I think, can age backward from hordes of clones and regenerate lost body parts, according to a new study that I read 2 years ago. I heard this from a lady named Julie Burwald, and she's definitely not getting a percentage based, her pay is definitely not based on how many clicks and how much traffic her writing draws. So don't worry about that. This will be very straightforward and not at all insulting to your intelligence. A hole rips through his body but seals up and heals completely. An appendage is sliced off. The tissues grow back perfectly. He is capable of extreme regeneration, perhaps even immortality. Those are the astonishing powers of Deadpool, the wisecracking superhero whose movie is now a box office wonder 2 years ago. It was, at that time, a box office wonder. Yet, there's one squishy marine invertebrate that can do all that and more, according to a study that was published 2 years ago in the journal PLOS1. Emblazoned with a 4-leaf clover on its back and lined with a fringe of thin tentacles, the moon jellyfish Aurelia is a veritable pantheon of power.
That cloud you see is, in fact, a colossal swarm of thimble jellyfish.
A thought bubble appears above my head, as though you can read my mind.
95% water.
Boy, I know I think loudly. Okay, it keeps going. Emblazoned with a 4-leaf clover on its back and lined with a fringe of thin tentacles, the moonfish, I read that from my brain already. It not only regenerates like Deadpool, it ages backward like Benjamin Button, always a hot topic, and forms hordes of clones like beloved comic book character Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man, whom everyone has a frame of reference with, and everybody definitely knows who he is. Heroes need sidekicks, like jellyfish need sidekicks, and the Moon's Jelly is a graduate student in marine biology who I met one time who told me about all this at China's Xiamen University named Jinru He. I don't remember how to pronounce it. He told me, but I don't remember exactly. In the spring of 2011, he did some stuff, and it keeps going, my memories, and he tells some stories about how a polyp, he took one chunk of a jellyfish, and it basically grew into another jellyfish. And so it was a clone, just like beloved comic book character Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man, who has a distinct personality whom everybody can tell immediately, and also what his powers are. Typically, a fertilized jellyfish egg becomes a larva, which grows into a polyp. Later, the polyp buds release many swimming medusae that then spawn and die. The life cycle has been compared to butterflies and etc. The polyps burst free, forming multitudes of clones. So here's the thing. You can take any little piece of a jellyfish, and it makes more jellyfish. And there are even very, very tiny jellyfish that basically cycle between fully grown, tiny little pinhead-sized jellyfish and the polyp form. And so because they cycle, when it dies, it becomes a polyp, and then it regrows. They're ostensibly immortal, which people are looking into for cancer research and things like that. I started reading my memory, and it's just so long and impossible to read my own memory about this thing, and it's just constantly my memory dropping in these things about superheroes that I can't even read it, and I got bored reading it myself. So here's the thing: jellyfish regenerate. They regenerate like crazy. They're barely functioning invertebrates with no mental capabilities whatsoever. They sting you, and they are propagating. They're propagating in the oceans to an insane degree thanks to global warming. So whether you like jellyfish or not, you can't kill them, and you'll probably have to eat them in the future. People are trying to figure out, how do you eat a jellyfish? They're disgusting and inedible, but we're going to have to eat them because we'll have no other fish left because we've overfished them and turned the oceans into acid. So get ready to eat jellyfish that are immortal. Maybe you can be immortal too. So in conclusion, read Alan Moore comic books and fear jellyfish. Thanks, guys. Have a good week. I'll post another heading next week, and hopefully my memory won't be so boring next time about the subject that I'm talking about. So thanks. Bing.